to the second speaker series of the Spring 2021 evening. We have an incredible group again here today. We were all watching with nostalgia the actual live and in-person conference, but it's also been so wonderful to stay connected virtually. And I can see that we've got a really interesting and dynamic group with us on the line tonight. And we also have inspiring and really future and forward thinking speakers. So we can't wait to share what we have planned with you tonight. We hope you enjoyed as much as we had enjoyed it planning it for you. So I'm going to just share my screen and hope that that goes well. Here we are live. I will start to slideshow. Oops, my video is getting in the way. There we go, slideshow right from the start. Here we are, we're up and running. So it is our reframing and renewal conference theme for this evening. And we have wonderful sponsors to thank. Thank you to Canada Beef, to Canola Eat Well, Get Cracking, and the Canadian Produce Marketing Association. We really love their products and we use them all year round, and we couldn't be happier that they were sponsoring our event and bringing the important messages to you tonight that were really part of something that we wanted to share. So we're happy to have our sponsors. Thank you all very much to those sponsors, and please look into their products and services. They're all fantastic. So let's see. Here we go. We have a great big welcome to all of you. And we have the renewing Skylar Frank from the London Environmental Network. And we have Gabby Calapos, Clean Air Partnership, who's going to be revitalizing us with her talk. And we have the riveting Ben Greeter, who is with Energy Efficiency for the Ecology Action Center, and all different types of perspectives on housing. And the theme for tonight is eco-housing in a new light. We've all heard a lot about eco-housing. We know that it's something that is in the radar. It's just not always really clear what our next step is in our own homes, and how can we help contribute to this big thing that is sustainability and all the things that we want to do for the climate. But these three wonderful speakers help break it down for us so that it makes it tangible, not only providing us an environmental scan of what's happening and going on in the areas of interest to us, but some real things that are tangible and that we can do. After that, we're going to have an open mic. Tonight, we're going to mix things up and not go into small breakout rooms and small networking sessions. We're going to stay as a large team, and we're going to invite all questions to the speakers as a large group at the end. We'll then carry on with draw and prizes. We have many goodies for tonight, and then some final remarks and a good night. One of the things that two things that I want to tell you as we move into this evening is that all of the speakers are happy to take your questions as they come up. They're welcome to say, excuse me, and pop in with a question that you have. You don't need to wait until the end. And also, if you want to, you can put your question into the chat. So the speakers, what happens when you share your screen is you no longer see the full screen, including the chat. So the planners of tonight's series are going to keep an eye open on the chat and intervene if one of the questions come up for the speakers. So please remember to do that. Also, I believe you're all muted, so don't forget to turn your mute off if you want to join in and ask a question and say something. We're really welcoming what your thoughts and ideas are, and it creates a really organic and experiential learning environment, and our wonderful speakers are open to that, and so we're going to help them out by asking our questions as they come up. So eco-housing in a new light, we wanted to look at it in a new light, kind of a pun intended there, because we know a lot of electricity and lighting is part of the eco-housing movement. We want to hear also what's new. And I think what's wonderful about our speakers this evening is they put a positive perspective and one of agency on how we can bring change. So many times in the eco dialogue, we can feel smaller than the issues, or sometimes not sure where to turn, but our speakers tonight are going to help us with that. We have Skylar Franke, who's the Executive Director of the London Environmental Network, speaking first, and then Gabby Kalapos, who is the Executive Director of Clean Air Partnership, and that's centered out of Toronto, but the reach is much farther than that, and Ben Grieger, who has lots of information for us from an energy perspective as the energy coordinator for the Energy Efficiency for the Ecology Action Center. That's a really big mouthful, but such an important line of work. We're really happy to have not just Ben, but everyone here. So our first speaker tonight in the Eco Housing in a New Light is Skylar Franke, and she is the Executive Director, as I've mentioned already, of the London Environmental Network. So she is doing much more work than housing, certainly an expert in housing and sharing her thoughts tonight on housing, but really in a broader environmental network, because there's so many things that communities are engaged in now and trying to do to respond to rise to the environmental challenges. And so she's also part of the Urban League of London board. And so really doing eco activity from a community perspective and really emphasizing that, and certainly near and dear to our hearts, because housing, which is our expertise, or the home as home economists, is something situated in communities. So we're really interested in what Skylar has to offer in terms of the overlapping of the environment, the community, and politics. And some of those things need to be reconciled in order for us to move forward, and really looking for, and not just in London, but in all of our communities. So really looking forward to hearing what Skylar has to offer. And don't forget to put your questions for her in the chat, or to just pop in and unmute yourself. So welcome, Skylar. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to stop sharing so that you can, and we'll turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you for the introduction. I'm just going to share my screen and present. Here we go. All right. Thank you guys so much for having me tonight. As you can tell, I'm based out of London, Ontario, but I did try to tailor some of this information more broadly to Ontario as a whole, because I know you guys are located across the province. And I am focusing more the residential side of things, but I'll kind of talk a little bit more general, maybe not just necessarily energy, because I know Gabby and Ben will be doing a great job on that. So feel free to stop me anytime and ask any questions. But I'll be giving a bit of background about our organization, and then kind of hopping into a bit more about residential sustainability. So if you haven't heard of us, if you're not in London, or if you are in London and haven't heard of us, we're an environmental nonprofit, and we support 47 other environmental groups. So we do act as an umbrella, as a network. And our aim is for London to be known as one of the most green and resilient cities in Canada. And that's a fairly lofty goal. If you know London, Ontario, I mean, it'd be off the top of my head, often we say Guelph looks like one of those excellent cities that's very green and resilient. And we're hoping to get up there with Guelph. And we do that work through participation, collaboration, and capacity in our community to co-create positive environmental change. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the whole point is that we are trying to collaborate with other people and with other organizations and agencies in order to create this environmental change, which is why it's great we get to talk to you guys, because it's a demographic, we haven't really had an opportunity to chat with. So I'm really happy to be making some connections with the work that you guys are doing. These are a bunch of logos of our members, but essentially to become a member of the Environmental Network, you just have to be an environmental group working in London towards some sort of environmental purpose. So we've got cycling groups, pollinator groups, Let's Talk Science, which teaches kids about science and math literacy, Alice Middlesex, which helps farmers convert some of their property into environmentally significant areas, Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, their environment department, which we work a bit with them on various Indigenous projects on their reserve, the London Urban Beekeepers Collective. So as you can see, it's a fairly broad cohort of people that we have in our network that we support and we work with, and we find that collaboration is key to a lot of the work we do. And again, this is kind of based in London, but you can extrapolate, and I'd say a lot of Ontario municipalities are in somewhat of a similar situation, although Toronto probably is ahead the most on the personal vehicle use because they have a lot of transit. But essentially in London, you can see the bulk of our emissions are coming from personal vehicle use. and then from our housing. So that is a significant area to make some reductions in if we want to mitigate the worst aspects of climate change. And that is within the scope of residents, of you guys, of people who live in homes, who drive cars, whether it's in apartment buildings or single detached homes, there is an impact of turning on your heat. A lot of the time it's based on natural gas, which is a fossil fuel, as well as driving cars around, which is using gas. And I like to talk a bit about this because to Peggy's point, a lot of the reduction in emissions we're hoping to get is from switching to electricity. There's other options, of course, but a lot of the reductions would come from getting off of natural gas, which is predominantly what people use to heat their homes as well as their water heater in their homes. And moving on to electricity. So I like to give people this understanding because I remember when I first started in the environmental sector, I did not know what Ontario's energy grid looked like and how important it was. So Ontario actually does have one of the cleanest energy grids from an emissions perspective. And that's because the bulk of it is based on nuclear facilities. So about 60% of our generation is from nuclear. And there is some problem with nuclear waste, but it doesn't cause emissions. So that is beneficial when considering we're trying to reduce emissions. And then we do get a good chunk of our energy from hydro, wind, and then there is some natural gas in it because we have some natural gas generation facilities and a bit of solar, geothermal, and then some petroleum. So just keeping this in mind when we're talking about making the switch from conventional heating sources like natural gas to electricity, or from driving a car that burns fossil fuels to an electric vehicle. The reason why we're talking about how that's important is because the electricity doesn't have as much emissions associated with it. Again, as you can see, natural gas makes up a small little amount. So just kind of keep this in mind as we're going through, because I find this really helps ground the understanding of why we're making this switch to electricity. So how can you reduce your environmental household footprint? And my favorite tool that I like to talk about that works anywhere in Ontario, because it's based on Ontario emissions, is Project Neutral. So this is a free tool that you can go on projectneutral.org, and it helps you understand how your choices and how maybe you have your home set up or your lifestyle set up, how they impact the environment. So it lets you fill out some surveys and determine how much carbon your footprint is, whether what kind of home you live in, how much energy you use, what kind of car you drive, if you drive a car, how much food do you consume that's local, how much do you throw away, how much do you compost, and it gives you an overall tally of how much carbon your household has. So I do like to say, you know, everyone has a carbon footprint no matter what. Even if you're a vegan and you bicycle everywhere and you live in a multi-unit residential building, you're going to have a carbon footprint because you live in a society that has created a system where you consume energy to live. And that makes sense. So this is my results when I do the Project Neutral survey. And it shows us that with a household of 3 adults, so it's my partner and myself, and then we do have a housemate, our carbon score is 13.1 tons of carbon a year. The average for 3 people in London is 19, so we're below average, but we're not the best. The best of the top 30 is 9.7%. So even though I work for an environmental nonprofit, I'm still not on the top 30%. So don't feel bad about your score, because I've found in the past people don't like to talk about it because they want to be at 0. And that's the goal. And that's where we're going to be heading. But a lot of people don't start out there. So I do want to show, if you go to projectneutral.ca, and I'll put the link in the chat afterwards for you to fill it out. You just do a quick survey and that gives you your baseline. And then you can actually do some deep dives into home energy, transportation, travel, food, and waste. And that lets you see, from my lifestyle, food emissions is a bit higher. So I'm an omnivore and we try not to have food waste. We try to compost everything, but sometimes it doesn't go that way. And then with home energy, I do live in a home that was built in 1933. It's a little bit old, a little bit creaky. It's not completely draft proof. So we need a new front door. So a lot of our emissions and our footprint come from living in an older home and burning natural gas in order to heat our home. So what you can do that I really love about Project Neutral is actually you can pick actions. And I find this is a very manageable way to try and make change. So on the action card page, it lets you pick out some different activities you can do to make a change in your footprint. So these are ones that I've accomplished in the last couple of months. So we compost everything now in our backyard in an organic composter, anything that we don't eat, of course, and we try to reduce as much of our food waste as possible. My partner and I have moved to eating primarily plant-based meals. So mostly vegan meals. Occasionally we still have some cheese, but we try not to. And then the biggest thing that made a reduction in my household emissions was that we recently swapped out our Hyundai Elantra in December for a used Nissan Leaf, which is a fully electric vehicle. So that reduced my emissions from driving. So that was a big change. And then there's a couple other works in progress I have, and then other action cards that I can take. So I highly recommend you fill out Project Neutral and then pick some actions to make some of those reductions.
That's wonderful. I do have a question.
Definitely.
Skylar. So the 19.1, that is the average household score. I'm just wondering how far away that is from the ideal, because average, you know, if you've got a lot of high consumers or really kind of poor sort of performance overall, your average is still your average, but it doesn't mean that it's good. How is Ontario in that 19.1 ranking against other provinces in Canada or international benchmarks?
Great question. And I will say the 19.1 is the average household score for London with 3 adults in the house. So it's not like if you did this and you live by yourself, the average household for a single unit dwelling in Toronto is going to be different. Okay. But if you want to compare us to other provinces or other, you know, countries, I would say, like I said at the beginning, Ontario has a fairly clean energy grid. It does have some emissions from natural gas, but there are other energy grids in Canada, like Alberta. And Gabby and Ben can hop in if they know this better. I really am focused mostly on London, but Alberta burns fossil fuels for a significant portion of their energy grid. So if you were to plug in an electric vehicle to get charged, you're actually burning fossil fuels to run it, because the generation of the energy for that energy grid is using fossil fuels. I might see if Gabby or Ben has a better description of that, or if they know actually.
No, you're absolutely right. The grid for Alberta, Saskatchewan are probably some of the heaviest fossil fuel electricity grids in Canada. East Coast also has a heavy reliance on fossil fuels, but certainly Alberta and Saskatchewan would have the heaviest reliance on fossil fuels for electricity generation.
I can give you the exact stats for Nova Scotia right now.
Perfect.
It's 26% natural gas and oil. They don't like to take them apart because oil is mostly the 26%. So that's why they're grouped together. And when they use solid fuel, we still burn coal in Nova Scotia. So we're burning 29% of our power is actually coming from coal. So if you combine those two, it's over 50% of our power is coming from fossil fuel sources, the 2 biggest fossil fuel sources that you can have. So yeah, our households would probably be much higher in the average score.
Awesome. And the federal government has put together some incentives, which I'm hoping Gabby or Ben will talk a bit more about. But there is, they've announced that there's $5,000 in rebates essentially for somebody to get an energy audit and then do $5,000 worth of retrofits in their home. And then they get another energy audit to see that there's been a decrease in energy use. So the federal government has announced that. We don't have any specific details on it, but it does indicate that they are interested in helping residents reduce their emissions and understand that people need a bit of money to do that.
Thank you.
So we could probably share links for that, but they haven't actually announced what is considered in that $5,000 package. So, you know, front doors or windows or insulation. I assume they're all covered, but it actually doesn't have specific information.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. All right, and I'm just going to quickly go through these because I know that Gabby and Ben are going to be doing a lot more on it, but there's lots that you can be doing in your home to be reducing your energy use. So the thing that we like to say in the sector is first you want to conserve as much as possible and reduce how much energy you use as much as you can, and then switch to renewable. Because if you're not reducing how much energy you use, switching to renewable is not going to be an excellent way to try and, you know, be able to provide enough energy for your home. We use a lot of energy right now in our households, and in order to be able to use solar and wind to cover that off, or geothermal, we actually have to do a lot of that conservation work. So that includes trying to make your building as airtight as possible, so you're not losing the heat. As you heat or cool your home, you don't want it like seeping through cracks in your windows and your doors. So you want to have a lot of air sealing or insulation in the walls, and your windows and doors, you want to make sure that you're not losing a lot of heat loss or, you know, AC from that. Then you can also look at reducing your electrical load through lighting appliances and power loads. So, you know, making sure that you have Energy Star appliances or LED lights in all of your like light bulbs, as opposed to having fluorescent. Then you can look at switching some of your mechanical items like HVAC. So, you know, I talked a little bit earlier about natural gas use in the home. So for example, in my home, we use natural gas in our furnace, natural gas to heat our water. We have a natural gas barbecue. We have a natural gas oven, and our dryer runs on natural gas. So I've got 5 sources where we're burning fossil fuels in order to, you know, use appliances to live our life. So my goal is to slowly switch over those appliances to electric, and then eventually put in a new mechanical system. So instead of having a natural gas furnace, switching to an air source heat pump, which runs on electricity. Other ways that you can be reducing your emissions. So as you saw from Project Neutral, we do have emissions that come from our food waste and from you know, garbage that ends up in the landfill. So ways you can make reductions there is recycling, but making sure you're doing it properly, because it does cost the municipality and therefore the tax dollar or the taxpayer a lot of money at the end of the year when recycling has not been done properly, because either they have to destroy recycling and throw it into the landfill if it's too contaminated, or it just doesn't end up in the right place and they kind of, you don't even bother to recycle it and it goes straight into landfill. So make sure you're recycling properly, and every municipality has different recycling rules. I strongly encourage, if you have space in your backyard, to get a composter and to be able to compost all your own food waste. If, for example, in London, there's been studies that show Londoners throw out $600 a year. So like buy stuff, throw it in their fridge, forget about it, and then throw it in the garbage. And that costs the average Londoner $600 a year. It might be different at your municipality, but it's probably fairly average.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In terms of mistakes with recycling, I know one that a friend told me about was that apparently you can't put the lid on a water bottle if you recycle the water bottle, because something about the pressure buildup, they can't safely recycle it, so they won't take it. Are there any other like tips that you have heard of that are traditional things that people just are unaware of in terms of what might be a mistake that they've made in their recycling?
Sure. Yeah. So first thing is, like I said, every municipality is different. So make sure you look, because if you move, we have a lot of, you know, Western and Fanshawe students in London, and their recycling rules from Toronto or Ottawa are very different than London. So I always say, try to familiarize yourself. And in London, there's an app called the Recycle Coach, and you can actually type in something and it'll tell you if you can recycle it or not. Another common one is, for example, pizza boxes. If there's grease on a pizza box on the base, they can't recycle it. So they'll throw that out. So my partner and I are nerdy, but we'll separate. We'll like rip the lid off the pizza box and like throw out the bottom of the greasy pizza box, and then keep the top that hasn't gone greasy and put that into the paper recycling. I encourage people to wash everything. So a lot of people will like give it a quick rinse and throw it in. But if it's something like a peanut butter jar, you're gonna have to give that a bit of a scrub, because that adds to the contamination. I'm trying to think of any others. A lot of people think you can recycle, for example, in London, you can't recycle styrofoam, but I have heard in Waterloo region, you can. So that's another one where, you know, if you don't know the rules, you might throw that in and then we actually don't do it. I can't think of any others.
Question, there's no, this is just out of my curiosity, there's no composting program in London?
Correct. London and Windsor do not have a composting program.
Okay.
Yes, but at the end of next year, we are supposed to have a composting program. It's taken a very long time, and most other municipalities in Canada and in Ontario have them, but we are a bit behind. I think the main reason, and this is like a hypothesis that I think is fairly accurate, is London owns its own landfill and its recycling facility, and the recycling facility, and then our landfill. So essentially, it's a little bit cheaper for us to tip in our own landfill than it is. So we've never really had the financial constraints or incentives to do composting.
Okay.
But my understanding is on the East Coast, there's very few landfills. So like composting, recycling is increased because they don't want to put as much in their landfill.
Yeah.
That might be accurate.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So I have a couple more slides, happy to take more questions. And I know, like I said, Ben and Gabby are going to go more into the science of energy efficiency. But I also encourage people to consider water conservation when they're looking to become more sustainable. Water doesn't have a huge emission impact, like to clean water at the pollution control centers and send it back. It's not very large. It does have a small emission factor, but really water conservation is just what's good for the environment. So we encourage people to try and reduce and conserve as much of the water as possible, which includes using low flow shower heads or aerators. Those are quick because usually you can just add them on to either your shower head or your taps. We always encourage people to use rain barrels to capture water outside, and instead of using water from the house on a hose, you can use the water that you captured in your rain barrel. If possible, if you're considering switching your toilets, picking a low flow flush toilet is awesome because it can save significant liters of water every year per flush. And another little trick that some people have used, and I'd recommend just making sure you Google and find the correct way to do it for your toilet system, but putting a brick into the back of your water tank, so that reduces how much water is used. You might have to adjust because you still want, obviously, your toilet to flush, but usually our toilets use a significant amount of water and that's not necessary. Another area that is kind of cool, and one of our employees has done this, is using gray water for toilet flushing laundry or plants. It is a little against some of the building code and it depends on where you live. But one of our employees, she created her own system where the water would come over a faucet, out of a faucet over top of her toilet bowl, and she could wash her hands with it, and then it would go into the toilet bowl tank, and then that would get washed through her toilet bowl when she flushed. So it's clean water coming in, she's washing her hands with it, but at the end of the day, she gets 2 uses out of that water instead of 1. So that's kind of fun, and it's not too common, but we do think that'll become more of a trend in the future. This is more, again, reducing sewage overflows, which happen when there's significant rainfall events and there's too much rain that goes into our sewer systems. And sometimes in London, at least, we have combined sewers in certain areas, and either it would backflow into people's basements, or they actually just overflow the sewage facility into the river. So we encourage people to use fog cups. In London, we have these. You might not have in your municipality, but you can just use any kind of old Tupperware or old container. And that's making sure you're not putting oils and greases down your sinks. Oils and greases down the sink, so like olive oil, butter, canola oil, those should not go down your sink because they do clog either your pipes or the municipality's pipes at a certain point. So we encourage people to put their fats, oils, and greases into cups. We encourage people to use permeable pavement so that there's less water runoff going into the sewers. And then a reminder that, and this is, I feel weird saying it, but it is what it is, only the 3 Ps down the drain. Some people, I've had lots of chats with our water pollution control people, and they've had like heads of Barbies and like money put down the drain and old checks. And there's just like, they actually have a whole wall of really weird things that they find in the sewers. But it actually causes backups. So that's encouraging to not do that.
Can I ask a question about the fog cups?
Yeah.
Where do you get them? And then how do you properly dispose of it? Does that go in the landfill?
Sure. So the ones in London, you can get at any resource center, at a library, at any of the municipally owned centers, as well as at the Enviro depots. So there's 4 of those across the city. And you just fill it up. So like, for example, if you have bacon or whatever, you just pour it in when it's warm and then you put it in your freezer. And you keep it in your freezer so it doesn't smell and it's not like liquidy and going all over the place. And then once it's full, you take it to one of the Enviro depots and they actually burn it for energy. So you use the fats, oils, and greases to burn and generate energy. If you don't live in London, I'm not sure if every municipality has it, but again, you can just use any old like plastic container and put it in your freezer and then throw it in the garbage. It's better in the landfill than it is in our drains. No problem. Any other questions on that? No? Okay, I'm almost done. So one of the last things we tell homeowners is to make sure that they are planting for biodiversity. Not only is it good for habitat for pollinators and other animals, It also is good for keeping water on the ground instead of overflowing into the sewers like I talked about. So in London, we have about a 24% tree canopy rate, and we actually want 30 to 40 for really healthy tree canopy. And a lot of municipalities are very similar in those numbers in Ontario. So we encourage people to plant trees on their private property. You can also plant native pollinator species, and across Ontario, there's different zones. So you probably would want to look and see what zone you're in. But if you're in Southwestern Ontario, you're in the Carolinian zone, and there's lots of beautiful species that you can plant to create that habitat. And then transportation. So, it has to work with your lifestyle, but there are lots of ways you can reduce your emissions. And the number one way is trying to get away from a single occupant vehicle in what we call combustion engine, but essentially like gas-driven one. So whether that's using an electric vehicle or hybrid, taking the bus, walking, biking, bike share, scooter share, figuring out what works for you. But the number one emission in London is from personal vehicles. So if you can cut that out of your carbon diet, it's the best way to go. All right, that's all I have for mine. Mine again was more holistic, and it's going to be passed over to Gabby and Ben for more of a deep down in energy. But I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll put the Project Neutral link into the chat as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Skylar. Are there any last questions for Skylar before we carry on? Well, that was wonderful. Thank you for sharing that resource where we can go in and see not only where the challenges are in our own homes, but that we can target ourselves with ways we can make changes. So it's definitely more positive. You get to choose the intervention for whatever it is that you want to change. So I think that that's fantastic. And I also, when I couldn't help but hear that we're going a bit back to the future. Bicycling, saving our grease, home cooking, that kind of thing. So in some ways, that's comforting to know that we're not giving up the past, but actually reintroducing some of all the wonderful things that we did. So I really appreciate that. And we'll have more time to hear from you when we get to the broader network or broader group discussion at the end. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to share my screen one more time. And I want to introduce Gabby Kalapos. So Gabby has done a lot of things in the eco community for over 25 years, and there's really too many accolades to even cover in an intro because of the major contributions that you've made at a very needed and important time. And you right now are the executive director of the Clean Air Partnership, but you've been doing many, many things from a positive perspective. How do we move forward? I mean, shame and blame is one thing, but let's move forward with what it is that we need to do. And I think that you very much do that. And we are all going to really appreciate hearing much more from you. So welcome, Gabby, and thank you very much for coming. I'm going to stop screen sharing and hand it over to you. And same with your presentation, we will accept comments along the way.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Peggy. And thanks so much, Skylar, for doing that. I'll just going to share my screen and pull up the presentation. And I think that should be get that into slideshow mode. And is it everybody? Oh, what did I do? Yeah. All right. So thanks so much for having me. I'm really glad to be able to kind of share a little bit of the story. What I'm really trying to do tonight is take you through a little bit of a walkthrough on a home energy efficiency retrofit. Why would you bother? What would it do? What's the sequence for how you would go about doing it? And then where would you start? And where do you want to end up at whatever time period that you would like to end up on that one? So what does it take to get your home to be a climate change champion? Really, when it comes down to it, the targets that we need, to the science-based targets that we need to achieve, which is 80 or 100% reductions by 2050, means that we cannot ignore our existing building stock. We have to, first things first, well, actually, we have to do them both at the same time. So we have to advance the new buildings that are built to make sure that they're net zero emission buildings right from the beginning, as soon as we possibly can, because every new building that we build that's just to the regular old building code will have to be retrofitted 10 to 15 years from now. And I can assure you it's going to cost them a lot more to retrofit it than if they built it with emissions in mind right from the beginning. But those key areas, as Skylar was saying, buildings, transportation, and waste are critical actions that we have to advance in order for us to have a chance to achieve our targets. So again, this is the kind of highlight, I'm not going to go on to it. Buildings account for it largely about 22% of Ontario's GHG emissions. When you look at it from the perspective of a lot of municipalities, like we're in the urban areas, mostly buildings account for almost half of the energy and emissions use in a community. So buildings, you can't ignore them. We got to address them. So I did want to highlight, this is a huge opportunity. This is something that can help people address energy efficiency within their homes, make their homes more comfortable. What I think is particularly important about this sector as well is that it's a huge local economic development opportunity and job creation opportunity. The first things first, these jobs cannot be outsourced. They are going to be dealt with, they are going to be advancing them at the local level. So there's job creation opportunities that can be within the community. They can't be outsourced. And in particular, a lot of the supplies can't be bought on Amazon. So they're going to lead to local economic development, which is always a good opportunity to give Jeff Bezos a kick in the ass so that he can leave the economy and better kind of support the local economy. Why a homeowner would bother? Really, when it comes down to it, from the homeowner's perspective, we have to build the value proposition for homeowners. They are the most important to be able to meet their needs. Really, we have to get their utility bill savings. They have to have a financial return in order for them to invest in their home and address the energy use in a way that reduces emissions while still providing them with the energy they need. One of the interesting things about this is that most of the time, when most homeowners are considering doing an energy efficiency retrofit, the first thing that motivates them is the utility bill savings. However, after they've done their retrofit, all they really want to talk about is how much more comfortable and healthier and quieter their home is. That is what they care about at the end of the retrofit, even though at the beginning of the retrofit, they're telling me they're going to be focusing in on, tell me how much it's going to cost and how much I'm going to save and how long it's going to take to pay back. One of the other areas that I think is really, really important is that we are still at the baby stage in our energy efficiency retrofit market. So we really need to help build the energy literacy of Ontarians so that they understand how operational costs can be reduced through energy efficiency measures and how that's actually going to increase the property value or resale value of their home to help build the value proposition for them. Another important thing about this is that energy prices are going to increase, carbon prices are going to increase. All of these retrofit work will reduce their vulnerability to energy and carbon price increases over time. Another key area that's really important from a customer's perspective is how do they build their self-reliance, that if there is disruption to the energy system, how do they ensure that they can shelter in place, that they don't have to leave their home if it's the middle of December and freezing cold and find a place that does have energy. Well, a lot of the retrofits of homes has a better built-in envelope that can retain the heat in the home for a longer period of time, reducing or increasing the time period that they can shelter in place in the event of an energy disruption.
Gabby, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm thinking of the inspections when you're doing major renovations or making additions to your home and the building code, and you need sign off and permits and that sort of thing. I imagine all of these innovations are introducing new language or stipulations in inspections, or is it not really at that level yet?
No, you wouldn't probably need, I mean, it depends, because what you would need to do, it varies from different municipality, but what you would need a building permit for is whenever you're dealing with anything with structural, anything related to electricals or plumbing. That's usually what triggers a building permit. Depending on the level of retrofit, you would need to, there would be the need to do a building permit depending on what you're doing. Like if you're doing sort of PV panels, there is the need to connect up with the municipality to get the permit. There is also the need to connect up with the utility to get the connection to the grid. So each of the different measures have different kind of mechanisms that need to follow through on. So for electric vehicle charging, that would be the contract you would need for the electric vehicle charging. We would also encourage you to tell your utility that you have an electric vehicle charging, because at some point in time, we know that there's going to be a lot more interactions between the electrical grid and electric vehicle charging over the longer term. And it's something that helps them, also the utilities, understand that where EV charging is taking place and where it isn't. So there are some recommendations in terms of what triggers a building permit requirement and what would trigger, what kind of the leading practices might be. But let's say, for example, you wouldn't need to get a permit for just doing insulation or windows.
So just then the next part for homeowners, without the help of the inspections and the building code and that sort of thing, and maybe it's another talk and outside the scope of today, is how do you actually find the skilled trade?
Yeah. Oh, that's a big question.
Product, because it's buyer beware without, help from the city. But I don't need to derail the conversation. It's just an interesting point as we start to talk about these innovations and how they fit into the existing codes and inspections and or qualified trades and products.
Yeah, anyone who's done any type of renovation to their home knows that this is not an easy process. Like right. It is a part-time job. And I keep joking around sometimes. I was like, it never gets worked into the business case of doing any renovation or a retrofit. And they're like, what? And I was like, the risk of divorce. Oh. Anyone who's done a renovation knows the toll it takes on the people living in the home during that time period. So right. Streamlining this and making it as simple as possible is a critical part of making this successful. And until we actually have a contractor world who's got the building science expertise, there is going to be the need for the homeowner to do their due diligence in order for them to protect themselves and ensure that quality retrofits are taking place. And there's the need for the programs to ensure that is taking place. Hence the reason why the most important thing to start and end your retrofit with is an NRCan audit. That sets you the stage for where your home is at present in terms of its building envelope, its mechanical systems, just the general understanding of your starting point for your home. And it's also really, really super important to do a post audit at the end, because one, if you are going to be doing any applying for any grants, you're going to need to do an NRCan pre and post audit. But it's also really important to ensure that what the contractor has done is quality retrofits that have occurred. So always remember that, bookend any retrofit with your pre and your post audit. Then the next sort of stage when you're looking at it is you're going to be looking at your building envelope work first. That's usually the first sequence that you need to do. Once you've done your building envelope, which includes air sealing, insulation, windows, any type of exterior cladding, even if you wanted to do that, the mechanical systems are probably the next thing to look at. Starting small with anything like a smart thermostat. You could think about moving to a furnace in terms of a higher efficiency furnace. We're really trying to encourage folks to move towards heat pumps, which is the next technology and far more efficient than furnaces will ever be. And then looking at your water heating options as well. Then there's renewables, electric vehicle charging, resilience measures. And as I was saying, your retrofit is always done with the pre and post audit to ensure that it's being done as properly as possible. So really what it does, it's going to give you an energy score. It's going to give you your starting energy score, and it's going to give you your ending energy score. That is going to determine what the improvement is, and it often will be used. We don't know the details of the Greener Homes federal grant, but the NRCan audit is going to be a critical component, and chances are the incentives are going to be based on your starting point and your ending point. So with homeowners, when you receive an audit, what you get is your blower door test, which really does a lot of data collection analysis, looks at your building envelope, how efficient your home is, where the leaks are happening. It's also going to give you a renovation report, which is going to identify the measures and which one has the best return on investment. And then there's also going to be an energy rating that comes with that. So in addition, once you get your NRCan audit, you really need help to kind of figure out, how do I go for the next steps on what I'm able to do now, where I want to go, and what are the steps that I need to do to achieve my final goal. Really, one of the key things, there hasn't been retrofit programs in market just as yet to really help people go through this long-term kind of process associated with getting to net zero emissions. That is going to be changing. There is going to be more programs coming into market. The one that does exist at present is the Toronto Home Energy Loan Program. There's going to be the federal government Greener Homes Program. And there is utility programs, and there's going to be a growing number of community financing and retrofit hand-holding support programs coming into market in the coming years. So one of the things that's really important, once you've gotten your audit, you've gotten your report, you've identified, actually, you know, I've got to start here. I'm going to be looking at, I want to do my building envelope, and I want to upgrade my mechanical systems or reduce my mechanical systems, but I'm not yet ready, let's just say, to do fuel switching. That could possibly be your step. So then in which case you would kind of separate out your retrofit from the building envelope energy efficiency efforts. And then you would identify, once your furnace comes to its end of life, you probably would want to switch to a different mechanical system that's not based on fossil fuels, but based on electricity. So that kind of provides, you're kind of getting your contractors and finding your help to figure out what makes sense for your home, what makes sense for you as the owner of your home, to try and figure out what's the help that you need to kind of get you to that stage. One of the most important things I think that's going to be associated with these programs is the need for that energy concierge to provide that hand-holding and support to the homeowners to help them develop their kind of roadmap for getting to zero. There's also going to be a lot of customers who do not want to take on the part-time job of managing a retrofit. So we have to provide them with a more turnkey approach for this. What that really means is that we need to build a demand for these retrofits and then build the business case, because we'll need to get some efficiency of scale in order to pay a retrofit manager to take on that role of managing the overall retrofit for homeowners. But in order for building the business case for the energy concierge, as well as for the homeowner, we need to build a fair amount of demand. So chances are what we're going to need to do is have, if folks don't want to manage their own retrofit, we're going to probably put them into a wait list, where then once we get a demand of, let's say, 25 or 50 homes that the contractors can go into and get that work done, then that would take place. So I did want to kind of highlight, not everybody, as you know, likes to manage their own retrofit, and there is going to be the need for those homeowners to get the help that they need. So I did want to kind of highlight one of the biggest issues, in addition to the hand-holding and the support that homeowners need. Another barrier that stops a lot of retrofits from taking place is the upfront capital cost associated with financing or doing the retrofit. So a lot of the programs that will be coming into market are going to have a financing element to it, so that you can loan money from the program. You can undertake the retrofit and then pay back the loan through a surcharge on your property tax or on your utility bill, depending on whether we can get the utilities to do that. But we can certainly work, no matter what, with the municipalities to get loan programs attached to the property that will then pay themselves back through the energy savings over time. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is get people the option to have a free retrofit, in the sense that they're loaned the money and the energy savings from that retrofit pay back the loan over a long period, over a course of time. So I did want to kind of highlight, I'm not going to go reading through all of these, but I did want to give you a sense of, like, okay, what is a home retrofit? What are the measures that need to be done? Air sealing is always the first thing that any home retrofit will undertake. It really looks at looking at it like identifying where your leaks are in your home, and then putting measures in place, either in the form of caulking through the kind of identifying that weather stripping, spray, getting the foams in terms of identifying the caulking of the gaps in different areas, window glazing if you don't want to change your windows just as yet, using sheets on plastic sheets on windows to give yourself extra glazing. Window glazing is another option you can do if you don't want to change your windows just as yet. And then these provided just a little bit of the cost associated with those different types of measures. After you've done your air sealing, insulation is the next best thing that you should be doing for your home. And then just highlighting that the insulation is rated by its R value, and you could add every R value. It doesn't mean that you can have like an R20, but if you put 2 R20s, you have R40. So you can add together. The higher the R factor of the insulation, the more your home is. 3 key areas in a home that need to be insulated: attic, basements, and walls. The most The most costly one to do is the walls, because of the fact that they've got drywall on top of it. You can access your attic or you can access your basement, but you can't often access your insulation inside your wall without taking the wall down. So you have to spray it in, or you have to clad it on the outside. I'm not going to talk too much about this because Ben's going to definitely speak to a lot of the embodied carbon, but that's a growing area where a lot of retrofits are being brought into consideration. I did want to highlight probably the biggest risk that anyone faces when they're doing a retrofit is insulation and moisture control. And there is a lot of improvements taking place in training for the insulators to ensure that this is not taking place. But these are the really, really important questions related to moisture control and vapor barriers that you will need to ask your contractor. And the role of the energy concierge in these programs is to help homeowners ask the right questions and ensure that this is being done in the proper manner. But it's probably one of the biggest risks associated with the retrofit, because you want to avoid, they really want to avoid mold and mildew issues. Doors are the next place after the insulation, and they're really kind of speaking to the improvements. Anyone who's had a gap-filled door to the outside world in winter knows exactly how inefficient doors can be on that one. And then windows, certainly one of the key things, the simplest thing, every time you're looking for a window, appliance, or anything, I really encourage, just get Energy Star. You know immediately right then and there that you are getting the best and most efficient product, or on the market for that kind of elements. Always choose Energy Star, never buy a non-Energy Star. So I really did want to kind of highlight, you can use those third-party labelings that help streamline the decision-making associated with the retrofit. I would also say one of the key things, like triple glazed windows, is something that's pretty standard in Europe. It's still far more expensive because we have no local manufacturing for triple pane windows here in Canada, or actually I should say in Ontario, we don't have. But really one of the key things that we're really trying to move towards, we know that triple glazed windows are the most energy efficient and where we need to go to help build the building envelope towards getting to zero. And interestingly enough, that with the triple pane windows, one of the biggest things that come out of it is, while they do cost more than double paned Energy Star windows, they do have a huge benefit in terms of creating quiet areas inside the home. Huge changes in terms of noise pollution coming into the home from the exterior. So that is one of the areas that we've heard back from those who have put in triple pane windows. They cannot believe how much quieter their home is and the noise protection it provides. Once you've done all the building envelope work, then it's the heating and air conditioning and mechanical systems that you would be looking for. And really when it comes down to it, we're always encourage people, if your furnace, if your natural gas, your fossil fuel furnace and hot water tank are coming to their end of life, really encourage you to kind of plan ahead to start doing the building envelope work prior to your mechanical systems failing in your furnace. Because once your mechanical systems failure and it's February, you're not going to be taking the time to do your building envelope work. And how good your building envelope is will determine the size of the equipment that you need in order to heat or cool that home. In addition, doing that building envelope really helps to build the value proposition for you to be able to switch from natural gas to electricity in the form of heat pumps and electric hot water or tankless hot water heaters, to be able to reduce the emissions associated with it, so that you don't have fossil fuels as your source of energy in your home, but rather you're relying on electricity. In Ontario, we do have an electrical grid that is relatively clean. We have some issues that with this government putting all its eggs in the fossil fuel basket and relying on the natural gas plants to address our shortfall in electricity during the nuclear refurbishment. That's a different topic that we can talk about some other time. But I did want to highlight that ultimately what we want to do is move our mechanical systems not to fossil fuels, but to electricity. These are different types of heat pumps that homes would want to consider. There's air source. And one of the issues on why we don't have, one of the issues that has limited air source uptake is the fact that they do not perform so well under the -5 to 10 degrees Celsius, which means you need supplemental heat. So during that time period when the air is really cold outside, heat pumps lose their efficiency. And so there is an issue with regards to needing supplemental heating, either in the form of electricity or keeping your natural gas furnace for those cold times when your air source heat pump may not be able to provide you with enough heat to keep your house warm. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, if you don't have ducts, there's a ductless mini split heat pump option that's available to you. And if you are if you're in a rural property with a lot of land area, ground source heat pumps might be a possibility for you. Ground source heat pumps do not suffer from the cold weather effect. So there's nothing, if you've got ground source heat pumps, you're good to go all year round, no issues associated with it. But there's different prices associated with it. So I did want to kind of highlight that. These are the different options on water heaters. Really, storage is always going to be using more energy than tankless is. Fossil fuel has a lot more emissions attached to it than electric hot water heater does. So really just kind of highlighting the illiteracy associated with wanting to move your fossil fuel hot water tank to an electric hot water tank, with tankless hot heaters being far more efficient than the storage ones. This is another one, a drain water heat recovery. This might make a lot of sense, especially if you have some teenage children in your home who like to take super long hot showers that you actually have to go down into the basement and turn it to cold so that they can finally get out of the shower. I don't know if anyone else has that issue, but I know I've had that issue with my teenagers. So this is something that it probably makes a lot more sense to do it in areas where you're using a lot of hot water, but it's definitely something to consider that you'd want to. Then there's solar hot water heaters. It's a little bit harder in terms of the management associated with it. Solar hot water heaters will not provide you enough hot water on its own. So it's a supplemental heating associated with either tankless or a storage hot water heater.
Yeah,
go ahead.
It's wonderful. All of this information is absolutely fantastic. And we're at 8 o'clock right now, and we do need to hear from Ben. So would you share your slides with us? So we
absolutely. So I'll just highlight solar PV and energy storage, the last ones, and electric vehicle. So I did want to kind of highlight, it doesn't only stop at the home. You can then go, once you've done everything at the home, you can move to your solar panels, you can move to energy storage to increase your resilience, and then you can address your electric vehicle charging as well. And I did want to kind of highlight, really what we're trying to do is advance the LIC financing, but all of this is perfect. So I will stop now.
That's fantastic, Abby. And I really appreciate your systematic approach to this, because each of us may be looking for a new roof, or maybe looking for a hot water heater, or maybe we're trying to find a new heat pump. So you took us through any problem that we could be trying to address, or any area we wanted to focus on in our homes, and you provide us help us on the way. And I think it's really encouraging to know that the government has made some commitments for 2050, and that there's a Green Homes grant. But I'm struck as you're speaking how we maybe have a practice gap as home economists, and we maybe need to scale up a little bit. We're great at personal finance and at nutrition and other things, but there's so much happening in housing now, past what some of our base education might have been, that it's been a wonderful eye-opener and inspiring to know that there's people like you out there charging forward and advocating for households. So thank you very, very much for that.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. And so for the purposes of time, I'm not going to screen share. I'm going to move right over to Ben Grieger, who is also an energy expert and really an eco advocate and doing a lot of really cool things. So Ben, I'm going to turn it right over to you now. And it looks like tonight, with all the incredible information we received, we're not likely going to have our broad group discussion. So please be sure to jump in with any questions that you may have for Ben. I know we did for Abby and we did for Skylar. So over to you, Ben, to share energy insights for our homes.
Thank you. Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. I'm really, really happy that Gabby got into the energy efficiency bits. I made some slides, but I'm not going to go through them because I wanted to talk more about embodied carbon, which is totally going to change your world. It totally changed mine. Because first time I heard about it, I was at a conference and everyone was looking around, hearing about embodied carbon, and all these energy efficient people were like, what is this going to do for energy efficiency? It's not that way. I think it's more of a balancing act. So thinking about energy efficiency addresses in a home the idea that you need to reduce your energy consumption and make sure that you're using everything as efficiently as possible so that that consumption goes down. That's taking care of your operation emissions, the GHG emissions that are produced from operating your home. But what about the actual greenhouse gas emissions associated with your home? Has anyone ever put any thought into that? And that is where embodied carbon plays in. And embodied carbon, I think, plays in very well with, or works very well with, energy efficiency. So in a sense, I'm going to share at some point this nice little board setup that I have. It's entirely balanced on a chair here, and we're going to slowly pile things on as we go through this presentation. There we go. One thing that that Gabby highlighted, but that I also really applies to, if I took out energy efficiency in this slide and put embodied carbon, it also has very similar effects. So one of the most interesting things that I'm learning is that in Nova Scotia, there's been this large energy efficiency industry that's been created as more energy efficiency programming comes out and more focus comes onto energy efficiency. But the embodied carbon sort of ideals, the idea that we are trying to store our greenhouse gas emissions that would have been produced from the production of those building materials and the actual GHG emissions produced during the construction of that actual home. We're trying to store all that those greenhouse gas emissions also in that home. And I'll explain how in a bit. But right now, what I'm most focused on is that if we focus on these local materials, which in Nova Scotia, there's a lot of materials that are both energy efficient and have low embodied carbon for buildings, you get these really interesting jobs, and they create a lot of jobs locally in municipalities and also in the province.
Ben, we have a question. When you say embodied carbon, are you talking about things like methane gas, CO2, CFCs, etc.? Is that in the same category?
In a way. So essentially what I'm talking about is carbon. When we talk about carbon in terms of embodied carbon, we're talking about this CO2e equivalent, which is essentially if you were to take all those greenhouse gas emissions and you were to make them equivalent to the amount of carbon dioxide that is produced, how much carbon dioxide is that? And so that is what I'm referring to when I say embodied carbon is all those greenhouse gas emissions that are produced. How are we offsetting that with an equivalent amount of greenhouse gas emissions, which we equate into this nice little CO2e is the nice little equation.
Thank you.
The
Thank
nice
you.
little symbol.
Thank you.
And so, there's these terms that are floating about: net zero carbon building, which essentially is a building that uses as much energy as it produces to operate year round. This means the building does not produce greenhouse gas emissions on an annual basis. So essentially, if you're heating a home and you're electrifying all the appliances in the home, whatever energy that uses to do that, you're offsetting that by putting solar panels on your roof, essentially, or putting a windmill or having some kind of renewable offset program in place in that home. Net zero energy ready is basically like net zero, but it's one step down. It's essentially saying, okay, we can get a building up to, you know, almost offsetting everything, but not quite. And basically, it's leaving the opportunity to put renewables or connect renewables to that building in the future.
Ben, there's a question about the point that you just made. Sue, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah.
Sue, did you just raise your hand with a question?
Did you have a question, Sue? You're muted.
No, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Apologies. Sorry for that, Ben.
Feel free to ask more questions.
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry about that, Ben.
And then carbon neutral building. That is taking into account embodied carbon and the operations of the GHG emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions produced from operating that building, and it combines it into this nice little definition of a carbon neutral building. The amount of GHG emissions that were produced from the creation of the building materials and the construction process are offset by the amount of GHG emissions that were stored in the building materials themselves. This type of building also does not produce any greenhouse gas emissions on an annual basis. You know, if we can get every building in Canada and every house in Canada to be a carbon neutral building, I think the world would be a beautiful place. We have a ways to go. Thinking about embodied carbon, you have to think about where are the materials coming from, or extraction. Where are these the original greenhouse gas emissions being created? This is a large sea salt operation in southern India. There's lots of environmental effects. I'm not sure about the amount of greenhouse gas emissions produced here, other than the amount of the equipment that's used to basically flood these fields and to extract that salt and ship it elsewhere. That would be greenhouse gas emissions produced from this operation. Then you have manufacturing. This picture at the bottom is a pulp mill in Nova Scotia, recently closed down actually. It is it's creating paper. And so paper products, the connection there to a building materials is that cellulose is used as recycled paper. So manufacturing, you have to take into account the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that are produced from this. And it sounds complicated, but luckily there's a tool that you can use, and I'll explain that in a bit. Then there's transportation. So you have to consider, where is this material coming from? Is it vinyl that's produced in China and then shipped to Canada? Is it something else like battery technology that's made halfway around the world and then flown in or shipped in? That's all something to be considered. When you take into account the extraction, transportation, and manufacturing, you start calculating the GHG emissions produced from each of those streams. For example, concrete, 1 metric ton of general use cement, according to the CSA group, emits 940.5 kilograms of CO2e, or carbon dioxide equivalent. And so if you're, then you think about, okay, so if I used 1 metric ton of cement in my home, how am I going to offset those GHG emissions, those greenhouse gas emissions that were produced from making that 1 ton of cement? And a good example of that is using natural materials, materials that absorb carbon dioxide and store them. And they can still then be stored in your home. So for example, timber. Not softwood timber, not softwood lumber, because softwood lumber actually produces greenhouse gas emissions. It's not a clean process, but there are certified, Forest Council certified wood products that have a basically a negative CO2e equivalent rating or a number associated with them. So they generally range from 60 to 200 negative kilograms of CO2e, which means that if you had 940 and you had a negative to that, then you are offsetting the amount of GHG emissions produced. The biogenic materials is that carbon sink, that carbon storage. So I mentioned timber, but really a popular one, and one that you can always use in and really goes well with making a building more energy efficient, is cellulose. Cellulose is made from recycled paper. They actually use natural oils to make it fire resistant. So it doesn't really use, other than the actual process of shredding that paper and adding those oils to make it fire resistant, there isn't a lot of greenhouse gas emissions associated with the production of that material. And so in that case, that is a really positive and great offset or carbon sink material to use in your home. And it has a high insulation value, or high, it's very energy efficient compared to other insulation materials such as fiberglass insulation. So that's one example. We can go through a huge list of materials, and I'm going to show you an encyclopedia in a second of all these different materials that you can look at from the Endeavor Center that would tell you, that allows you to understand a bit more about how these materials offset the building in and of itself. Another great example is hay bale construction. Or even hempcrete. So if you were to use hempcrete instead of concrete, you're essentially using a grown crop, mixing it with lime and water, and doing that all on site, probably mostly by local contractors, to create these blocks of cement, like concrete blocks that can be used to create a foundation. That in and of itself means that you're not relying on cement, which has a high amount of greenhouse gas emissions associated with it, and you're you're using a local material that is storing greenhouse gas emissions. It's storing that carbon dioxide, it's harvested, and then it's used in the building where it's stored. And the great thing about embodied carbon, the great thing about it, is that a house, if you build it right, can last 100 years or more. So when in fact you use embodied carbon materials in your home, then you are storing those, guaranteeing that storage of that material for at least 100 years. And if you think about it like that, there's so many cool materials that you could actually use that not only are environmentally friendly, not only store embodied carbon, not only are increase the energy efficiency of your home, but also smell nice and are not toxic. So it's a great avenue to explore. And I think what I want to do to keep it short is to go into this encyclopedia, because when I show you the encyclopedia, I have a little more visual of what I'm talking about here. Share the screen. There we go. So right here, we have the Endeavor Center's encyclopedia, and it covers materials up the wazoo. You can look at foundation materials, wall materials, insulation materials, cladding, flooring, finishes, windows, water supply, HVAC, energy, wastewater. It takes into account the embodied carbon from all these different materials. Let's go into cladding, because this one gets really interesting. I've seen homes, and I've seen demonstrations homes where they use steel cladding and steel roofing And yet they're still able to store more carbon in their building and also be very energy efficient than actually being a net positive, or being producing more greenhouse gas emissions and not storing enough. And what I find interesting about that is that it looks entirely industrial, but it has in its core a lot of elements. And cladding can be very interesting. So you can have thatch cladding, which I'm not sure many people know about. You can have composite shingles or composite wall panels. There's a really neat company in Nova Scotia based out of Yarmouth that makes composite wall panels that also have a bit of insulation built into them, that is made out of recycled pop bottles. And so when you take those kinds of materials into account, you have this interesting construction that can occur. Yeah, the interesting thing that you can also do inside a home is you can look at the type of painting that you're using on the inside, or paint. So one thing that I find interesting with the Ecology Action Center is that we actually have walls that are were made out of clay-based paints that we made on site. Low toxicity, very, very breathable, and using local materials. If you're looking for really nice clay-based paint recipe, you can go to oh my goodness, I'm going to remember in a second. I think it's we'll go to the Ecology Action website. We have the recipe there. Yeah, I'm going to entertain questions at this point because we're looking at 8:19, I think.
We are, and thank you very much for that. And we know you had so much information to offer us. There is one, not a question, but an ask, please. Will you post that link in the chat so that everyone has it?
I had it ready.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And I just want to offer to the group, did anyone have any questions for Ben? Thank you, Ben. I see that in the chat. Thank you. All right. Well, you know, I couldn't help but think again, we're going back to the future when we're talking about thatch cladding and hay bale versions of foundations and putting wood in our homes. We really did know something in the good old days. I guess we have to remember that. And I'm impressed at just how much knowledge there is out there, but also wondering what's it going to take for it all to be mainstream when we integrate, you know, Skylar's community efforts and Gabby's right from the very foundation up, things that are happening in green housing, but also then taking into consideration this balance we're trying to achieve with the energy in our homes and the origin of things and how long it lasts, and just so much to know, and in some ways so far away from common and everyday practices in new builds, but also in renos now. And how I guess we move that forward as home economists is just to continue to be knowledgeable and to find out more information and to continue to dialogue with groups such as your own. So there's a question here from Lisa, interested in the chair experiment that you were going to show us behind you. You've got us curious about the chair. And possibly while you're doing that, Michelle, if that wasn't an error, you had your hand raised.
I was just, hi everyone. I was just wanting to ask the question of, I live normally in downtown Toronto, so the infrastructure is there for electricity, for transportation. But for the last 8 months, I've been living on my parents' farm, and the infrastructure isn't here. Yeah, the infrastructure to allow us to, you know, rely on public transportation. Hydroelectric is extremely expensive. It goes out on us to be able. So we actually rely on a few different types of energy. We burn wood, we have natural gas because it runs our generator that has to come on quite a bit because hydro goes out. So it's interesting, all of these opportunities, but I think that's one thing still that the federal government needs to look at is how are they going to support urban? I know a few people on the line tonight are from Ottawa area, and we've all lived through the ice storm and know what it's like not having power for, you know, 3, 4, 5 weeks without it. So it's just something to consider and think about, is that there's that difference still between urban living and rural living. And that's really hard across Canada.
That's an excellent point, Michelle. The rural and remote areas need to have some special consideration, I think, as we talk about the eco-housing and what plans and provisions, and as you say, infrastructure, it's got to be part of the solution as well. So thank you for bringing that forward. Ben, was there anything you wanted to finish off with? I see you there doing a balancing act.
It's all about a balancing act, essentially. That's what this chair experiment was demonstrating. So I have some nice plastic materials here. I have some nice wood materials here. I have, this is supposed to represent a bit of shingling, which, depending on the shingling or the roof shingling, you can, the roof tiles, you can be net positive or net negative. So net negative meaning you're storing carbon, net positive being you're not storing carbon and you're releasing more greenhouse gas emissions than you really want to. And just the point that it is a balancing act. If everyone in Canada decided to just start putting a whole bunch of latex, acrylics, and lots of oil-based products in their homes, and we kept doing that, well, then everything kind of falls out of balance and everything falls out of whack. And yeah, it's a simple but true that if we don't focus on these things, then it's a future that would be a very interesting future indeed.
Well, that was a dramatic finish. Thank you for showing us that the balance is very, very important. And I really appreciate that. And I want to thank all three speakers really sincerely for your enthusiasm. I can tell how much work you put into all of your presentations and the passion with which you wanted to deliver those messages. We're going to be recording, as everyone knows, and so we can go back and have another look at the things that flew by so quickly as we were trying to stay on schedule, but that were so important for us all to know. And again, for us as home economists to start to think about evening out our practice space and making sure that we are prepared to help people in this area and really be part of moving things forward in a positive way and advocating where we need to. So thank you, all three of you, very, very much for being here, for doing that. I'm going to share my own screen right now. Gabby, were you just waving, or did you have something you wanted to add? It was just a wave. Okay, fantastic. And so here we go. I'm going to screen share and we're going to bring the night home. Thank you very much for that. We sort of open mic'd along the way in the evening today. So that was wonderful. Thank you for the candid and authentic engagement. So I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca Hartley right now for our draws and our prizes. And as Rebecca's organizing, we need to offer a very special thank you to Mary Carver, who has sat quietly among us for our speaker series. And as we've been handing out these wonderful gifts, Mary has been the generous donor of several of the cookbooks. And so we wanted to just say thank you very, very much, Mary, for all of your support and the wonderful gifts that you've shared with us to have our fantastic draws. Thank you, Mary. And over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Peggy. Yes, thank you very much, Mary. One of our cookbooks tonight is again from Mary Carver. So tonight we're going to be raffling off the Plum Gorgeous cookbook. So the winner for this one was Mary's iPhone. If we could confirm who Mary's iPhone is in the chat, that would be great.
So there's,
or if you want to unmute.
A Mary connecting in via iPhone is the winner.
Yes.
Okay. Mary via iPhone. Is there a Mary who's calling in? Okay.
Hi, it's Mary.
Oh, hi, wonderful. Over to you, Rebecca.
Perfect. Mary, if you could just put your full name or your email so that I can get a hold of you afterwards, that would be great. If you want to send it to me, direct message in the chat.
Okay.
Perfect. Congratulations.
Great. And it's been a great evening. I've learned a lot. So thank you very much to everybody.
Wonderful.
You're very welcome. Okay, so our next winner was Brooklyn. So we have Brooklyn Buckley, who's won from Cindy Hartman, donated a fantastic nails spa gift certificate. And our winner for that one was Brooklyn.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations, Brooklyn. I know you're on the call. I saw you there. And you know how to connect with Brooklyn, Rebecca?
Very much, yes.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So congrats to you both. And thank you again to Cindy and Mary for donating those gifts for us.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very, very much. Also, for some of you want to reframe, since our theme is reframing and renewal, is that we are at the PHEC stage of looking for new board members. So there's current vacancy as the president-elect, as chair, as VP Professional Development, and member at large. So please email us, the information is there, or connect in with someone you know on the OHEA board and express your interest, because we would love to have you. And it's a really exciting opportunity to network and acquire some incredible, incredible skills. I also wanted to share with the group, if you haven't already heard of it, that there is a new television series starting out of Hollywood, going to be airing on ABC and in Canada on City TV, and it is called Home Economics. So if you haven't heard of this, look at the trailer. I don't know whether you're going to be happy about this or very disappointed, but I thought, just as announcements and as we're staying current, that some of you may start to hear that there is this TV series, Home Economics. So it may generate more interest in our profession. I'm not sure if they're going to be managing the topic well, but that's something I thought the group might be really interested in. We want to have you the next time we come together, which is April 21st, and we have sustainability in agriculture with a wonderful panel who's going to be talking about the grasslands and some of the activity that is also need to be part of the sustainability dialogue, and an incredible panel. So please join us for April 21st for us to do that. And thank you very, very much tonight for our sponsors, Canada Beef, Canola Eat Well, the Egg Farmers of Ontario, and the Canadian Produce Marketing Association. Thank you very much to our sponsors. And thank you also to the Planning Committee, who volunteered their time to coordinate the speakers and bring this event to you. Michelle McAdoo and Eileen Stanberry, Leslie McGaskill, Rebecca Hartley, and Joy, who makes sure all of our technical problems go away, and Brooklyn Buckley. Thank you very much to the Planning Committee. Thank you all very, very much. We will see you next time, and have a lovely, lovely evening. And thank you again once more to these fantastic speakers and for all the things that you brought to us this evening. Thank you.
I want to interrupt temporarily. I apologize, Peggy, but Brooklyn's asked if we want to redraw because she's not actually located in London.
Okay.
So we can redraw that one because we do have a small gift certificate to give away.
Okay.
Perfect. So the other winner, I hope everyone else, okay, perfect. Sorry, one of the numbers just popped off. So it was our 21st winner. So give me 2 seconds here. Perfect. So that was Isabel Hewitson.
Okay, Isabel, are you on the line?
I guess I have to be unmuted.
Unmuted. Well, congratulations, Isabel. You're a winner.
What should I do about it? I live in Owen Sound.
Oh goodness, we can send a book. We do have another cookbook if you prefer that we can send that to you. So we have a Cooking with Ontario Veal that was, again, generously donated by Mary Carver.
Okay. Who should I contact, or how should I?
I'll get in contact with you. Is the email that you registered with good?
I am registered and I have a membership, yes. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Then I'll get in touch with you by email either tonight or tomorrow.
Very good.
Okay, talk soon. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Thank you again, Peggy.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Brooklyn. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you again to our speakers. We'll see you on the 21st. I learned a lot, and definitely the bar has been raised for sure. Not only what I thought I knew.